Happy Halloween to everybody out there. Danny Pommells, aka Jason, and Noah Levick, dressed as a friendly sports reporter, brought to you by Wilmington University. This is a Sixers Talk podcast. So glad you could join us. This is funny because you can't see my mouth moving, so I technically could just be making hand gestures, and you feel me,
Yeah,
Noah?
I do have something else here, similar effect.
Oh, look at you, the Phantom of the Opera. What is that?
I'm not sure exactly, but it looks kind of scary.
Eyes wide shut.
Yeah, that's what it calls to mind. And similarly, you cannot see my mouth moving, but rest assured, we're talking, and we will be talking about the Philadelphia 76ers here.
That was a good surprise. I didn't think you had anything, and then you pop up with the Phantom of the Opera, bro. That's one of my favorite plays, man. It's nothing like hearing that dude hit those crazy notes when he's singing, and the theatrics of the chandelier falling and the moat and him rowing that boat and stuff like that. I enjoy that play a lot, but we have to talk about the dark days that are at the Wells Fargo Center these days and the spooky season that is the Sixers campaign here in
Oh,
2024. I know it's like enough of this, but
yeah, I'll let you take the Halloween shine.
listen, enough for me too. But listen, tough to watch this team, particularly without Joel Embiid and Paul George. We continue not to have them in the lineup. Tobias Harris had the last laugh as the visiting Detroit Pistons handled the Sixers pretty convincingly last night at the center. They fall to 1-3 on the season. I believe it ended up being a 10-point loss, 105-95. And Tobias ends up with 18 and 14. Tyrese Maxey again goes over 30 points. But this team needs more, Noah. You could argue that they are one of the worst teams in the league. It wouldn't be tough to argue that without Joel Embiid and Paul George. We sit in these doldrums, these lowered expectations. And do you feel like this is a time where they're learning and growing, or is it just really the waiting period until these two all-stars return? Because you would think that there's opportunity there for guys to find things out about themselves, know what they can do when those guys aren't in the lineup. There's something that they're learning here, right? There's some growth happening, right?
You would hope so, but yeah, it's hard to take a super optimistic slant after last night. I think if you want to, you can say this team's, track record player by player suggests they shouldn't be one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the league. Sixers right now.
I think they're the worst.
Yeah. Outside of garbage time, they have the worst three-point percentage in the league, under 30%, and their volume also isn't good either. It's bottom 5, bottom 6-ish. So sure, like you expect Eric Gordon, Kyle Lowry to hit at a slightly higher clip, for instance, but some of these problems are clearly just who the Sixers are when they're down two all-star players. I think we all see when Andre Drummond's off the floor, they look really undersized. They struggle to grab defensive rebounds. And Tyrese Maxey said the margin for error is slim to none, basically. So all of the little miscues with transition defense or forgetting a play or blowing a coverage, they just get magnified a lot. So, yeah, I think to some extent, every team is having some growing pains right now. Sixers did add quite a few new significant rotation players, still figuring out exactly where Caleb Martin is best, how to best employ Gershon Yabusele, and these sorts of questions. But yeah, I think if we're kind of looking at that spectrum, hard to really buy into the notion that this team is growing like that Nick Sirianni flower metaphor and just out beautiful fruit any second. I think this team in all likelihood is a sub 500 ball club when Joel Embiid and Paul George are not in the mix. But that said, got to do better with the factors within their control. And last night was certainly one where outside of Tyrese Maxey, it's hard to really spotlight anyone who played especially well for the Sixers.
Yeah, man. Tough go of it last night with the Pistons. And you tried to warn us on the podcast yesterday. They have played several teams really tough, had some almost near victories, almost beat the Celtics, but didn't finish that off. And you try to let us know that this team is not a pushover. And they came in and Jaden Ivey was screaming all over the place and rocking the rim. And Jalen Duren was a force underneath. And Tobias Harris, man, 14 rebounds. I think I heard Amy say on the post-game program that was more rebounds than he had all of last season with the 76ers. So he was playing some inspired basketball, maybe not right out of the gate, but when it mattered most for this team. And listen, it was easy to know when Tobias had the basketball because he was booed mercilessly whenever he touched it. But the fans were so disenchanted by the end of the game that the booing had stopped. Like they weren't even booing him anymore. Like when he was touching the basketball. We did get a tribute video for those keeping track, but Amy Fadul is off the hook on owing me another cheesesteak because it was a joint tribute video with Paul Reed and Tobias Harris. So boos when Tobias was on the screen, cheers when Paul Reed was there. And we also heard from Paul Reed and Tobias before the game started. Paul Reed saying he was pretty shook up for the fact that he's not on the 76ers anymore. I can't think of the exact verbiage that he used at the moment, but maybe Noah, you remember. But Tobias went into a long explanation about how he felt like his time here in Philly was pretty remarkable for his life because it was the first time he had stuck something through to the very end where when in his younger basketball days, when he was on an AAU team and didn't like how things were going, he would just switch teams or didn't think he was getting enough shots or opportunities or didn't like the coaching or whatever it may be. He would just go to another team. And this is, and also maybe indicative of his NBA career where he has been traded many times, but this was something he saw through from beginning to end. And we know Tobias as a cerebral guy, a thoughtful guy, a guy who's going to reflect and try to make the most of situations and be professional and classy and things like that. And he was all of those things, accepting the questions, being not, averting things or trying to, dodge questions and things like that. But you were there, Noah. You talked to those guys at shoot around and after the game. Can you give us some more insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say Tobias Harris framed it like, my tenure is one where all the mistakes fall right on my shoulders and
Right.
anything like that. I mean, he did say it was tough that he had to frequently adjust roles, and that, of course, he wishes they could have gotten out of the second round, but that's just sometimes how sports work. It's very, very hard to always get exactly what you want. But yeah, he's always going to be a pro. He's going to be measured and considered in his words, and he certainly framed it as a learning, growing experience for him, where the years here in Philly were rocky, and he ultimately saw it through. 5 years, 180 million, and now he is back in Detroit, and yeah, had a good night for himself. It looked like it was not going to be a banner Tobias Harris performance. Started like 2 for 9 from the floor. A couple of short leaners and runners were not dropping, but by the second half, you noticed Tobias's dad in that first row cheering him on, and as he said, the boos that he was hearing on every touch were a little less enthusiastic as the game sort of slipped out of the Sixers' reach. And yeah, Paul Reed expectedly really candid and saying, Philly always has a place in his heart. And it did hit him hard when he was not retained by the Sixers, but ultimately trying to make the best of the new situation in Detroit. We did not get to see him even in garbage time. JB Bickerstaff did not turn Paul Reed's way. They've obviously got Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart ahead of him right now in the center pecking order there. And yeah, it is a little surprising to me that we have not seen more B-ball Paul in Detroit. Of course, he's a wild card sort of player, and I'm a little not on the same page there that he hasn't been getting minutes on a young rebuilding team. But yeah, regardless, Detroit played its best game of the year against the Sixers, and honestly, the 10-point margin of victory was a little flattering. As you said, like there was just not much juice in that Sixers crowd by the end of the game for good reason. I mean, they were down by 20 points in the third quarter, and Jared McCain and some of the youngsters allowed the Sixers to make the margin of victory a little less extreme, but certainly a bad loss for the Sixers. And Tobias Harris was, one of the reasons that Detroit was able to pull out that first W.
Tyrese Maxey saying after the game they were just out-toughed, outworked here by the Detroit Pistons. And do you feel the way they've been losing is concerning? Yeah, okay, no Joel Embiid, no Paul George, but Maxey going 2 for 10 from three. Guys, not having effort and energy. There's some things you can control, some things that are within your grasp to trying to handle and take responsibility for. What do you think about the way they've been losing? And it has been varied. How they lost to the Pistons, how they lost to the Bucks, how they lost to the Raptors haven't all been similar, but they all have been losses, and they all have been games where the Sixers could have been more engaged, could have been, closer to the finish line than they were. But what do you make of the way they've been playing? Yeah, it's a lot of new pieces, but, Maxey going 2 for 10 from three last night, and his shooting woes outside of the Pacers game with this larger workload is a little concerning.
I would not so much go right to team shooting. As I said, like they're going to shoot over 30% from three this season. It just that's going to happen, and there's going to be some sort of bounce back collective performance here in the near future. I think if anything,
transition defense.
Transition defense hasn't been good. I think with the shooting in particular, like you do look at Eric Gordon and Kyle Lowry, and worth continuing to monitor, like what do these guys have left? That's one where if their shooting percentages dip, and we're 20, 25 games into the season, I'm less likely to chalk that up to randomness and a little more inclined to say these are guys who are in their mid to late 30s, that this could be, some physical decline that we're seeing here in those two players. And yeah, like the looks are generally going to be lower quality when you don't have your two all-stars out there. Yeah, I think with Maxey, he played a good game last night. I thought he had decent feel in the pick and roll. Andre Drummond's obviously this team's best screen setter right now. I thought his decision-making was good. Should have had a bunch more assists, but guys weren't making shots around him. And I think, yeah, just some of the decision-making around Maxey was poor last night. Like, he, makes the right play when he sees two, kind of moves the ball along, and the Sixers keep swinging it around the horn and don't take the right shots. And someone like Kelly Oubre Jr., you got to be better than whatever he was last night, 4 for 13 from the floor. So I think aspects of the offense are just kind of impossible to solve, but I think some of them should get better. Just given sort of the track records of these players and what have you. And yeah, defensively, it's been a mixed bag. I thought, the transition defense issues last night, some of it did seem like the Sixers were just demoralized and getting outworked and outran down the floor by Detroit. So you don't love to see that. But, that's kind of the way things tend to trend in the NBA. When you miss shots, a lot of the other habits and attention to detail do tend to fall by the wayside. So definitely not a trend the Sixers will want to see moving forward. And yeah, I'd say like as far as the way they've been losing, hard to classify these losses as encouraging ones. Like, as you said, none of these games have been close down the stretch that they've lost. And the one that they won, they just had to eke it out in Indiana. So definitely not a spot where you can say, well, they're 1-3, but there's a ton of reasons to think that the state of affairs will get much better in the near future with this particular group of players available. Do think this looks like a ball club that should be 1-3 and is not going to have an easy time winning games again, as long as Embiid and George are still on the sidelines.
Maybe the cavalry is on the way. We'll discuss that here after we pay some bills on the Sixers Talk podcast. Of course, we are brought to you by Wilmington University. Find your higher education home at Wilmington University, where your academic success is celebrated by a caring community. Explore your opportunities at wilmu.edu. Celebrity cook Steve Martirano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martirano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations for Martirano's Prime on Open Table. Back here on the Sixers Talk podcast, Jason Voorhees has returned. But, Noah, it could get scarier for the 76ers here as a 3-game West Coast road trip awaits them. Phoenix, LA Lakers, LA Clippers on the horizon. You would think Paul George wants to play in LA, his hometown. You would think he wants to take that trip. So Shams Charania is reporting that there's a chance Joel Embiid could return Saturday against Memphis. Left knee management will continue. We will probably not see him in back-to-backs, but we have not come across that yet. So let's not foreshadow what's to come and wait and see what happens. Is Memphis a game they could win without Joel Embiid, do you think, Noah?
Yeah, Memphis hasn't had a great start to the year. They're 2-3, and have a game tonight, I think, against Milwaukee.
Who also only has one win, which is strange.
Milwaukee is certainly struggling as well. The Sixers on opening night is by far the best game they've played thus far. So yeah, it's a game they should have, I think, a greater sense of desperation for. I think they should see it as winnable. Obviously, our first look at Zach Edey will be fun, and the Sixers will be tested by his size and strength down low. As far as the prognosis for these stars, we did see Paul George after shoot around running up and down the Wells Fargo steps, doing a little ball handling work. And Nick Nurse said pregame that the plan is for both Embiid and George to be on the court today and Friday, and that then he expects to have a clearer idea of where they're at moving forward and their status. Of course, though no one's saying it, the Sixers are going to be even more reluctant now, I imagine, to say anything super definitive about the status of these players, given they've just been fined $100,000 for statements publicly that the NBA has deemed, inconsistent with the actual health of these players. But yeah, I think, that there legitimately has not been any super obvious red flag to say there's been a big setback for Joel Embiid or Paul George. They really have still been out there on the court. We have seen it with our own two eyes. And they do indeed seem to be trending toward trying to play in the near future. But we all know the Sixers are not an organization that likes to give you an exact timeline or let you know on exactly everything that is happening behind the scenes. But yeah, I think everyone sort of built up that Paul George versus the Clippers game as one that could be really exciting and fun. And there's about a week or so until we get there. So the Sixers would love to have Paul George in action, and their chances of actually winning that basketball game would be much better if number 8 is on the court for them.
We hope things were coming to a head here, and the fellas can return sooner rather than later. Charania, in his report, also adding, which was not the case a few days ago, that Joel Embiid has played some 5-on-5 as well. So that is definitely a step in the right direction. Paul George, he definitely had a good lather going with that workout, taking the stairs, dribbling and whatnot. And after the game, Nick Nurse, definitely as avoidant as he was about answering those questions, the questions returned in the post-game interview. Particularly, he probably didn't feel like fielding those type of questions after a loss, but the questions were there. I believe it was Kyle Neubeck was one of them. Howard Eskin was getting in there as well. Just trying to figure out some transparency, trying to figure out Eskin's perspective was from a fan's perspective of them spending money on trying to see these players play, but their hard-earned dollars and them buying tickets aren't really being valued or honored as much because these guys aren't out there and they have no timeline or idea of when they will be out there. did you feel like it was too heavy-handed to continue to revisit those questions about Embiid's situation and why they're not out there on the floor? And not because of the people asking the questions, but because Nick Nurse didn't quite have the answers, and that was more or less questions maybe the front office should be getting asked, or more pertain to Daryl Morey. Did you feel like, from that perspective, that that the questions weren't quite as valid?
I thought the gist of the questions was fair. Yeah, I mean, this happened pregame, and
Right.
Nick Nurse
was, he kind of was the same.
Yeah,
same
he was
questions
not
generally, but just after the game.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the context too of they just been fined $100,000, right? So like that's a new development in this story,
which Nurse didn't know about.
Yeah, which is kind of absurd, or he didn't know that it was public or whatever. I don't know.
But,
I mean,
why even take that step? Why even just be like, okay, yeah, you know what I mean? You're acting like,
Yeah, yeah. But look, yeah, it's the kind of questions where it's very obvious. You have to ask about Joel Embiid and Paul George and what's
absolutely
going on here, because the main reason the Sixers are 1-3 is that those players are not available, and no one has a clear idea of when they're going to return. And I think especially with Joel Embiid, what exactly is the state of his left knee? What do the Sixers mean by he's ramping up? What exactly is he doing in practices? When they say he's a partial participant, all this sort of stuff you'd love to know. And in order to know, you have to at least ask the questions. I think for Nick Nurse, very understandable that he's not going to want to go against organization protocol and be too revealing. As I said, he did at least note that the plan is for them to both, be on the court Thursday and Friday, and to have a better idea of what's next after those on-court, activities for his two stars. So yeah, as far as who should be answering the questions, we'd all love to hear from the highest authorities possible, but that's unfortunately just not the norm in sports, that you hear from like Simon Rice, the Sixers director of athlete care. I think most teams, strongly prefer for their medical folks to stay behind the scenes. Daryl Morey was, just named as part of the reason the Sixers were fined. I think we, would be surprised if he suddenly decided now was the time that he wanted to talk about this subject at length. So yeah, it tends to fall on the head coach to take these hard questions and sort of be the face of the franchise here. And Nick Nurse is doing the best he can in a semi-impossible spot. I think that there are certainly instances where it feels like he could give us just a little bit more. Like, yes, the team is telling us that they partially participated in this practice. Okay, like you coached the practice. Did they do 3-on-3? Did they do 5-on-5? What do you anticipate the next practice will look like?
Were they going 80%? Were they going 100%? Were they going 50%?
Yeah. To me, that doesn't fall under the purview of medical expertise. That's just you sort of conveying the general facts of what happened in this practice that you just coached. But no, it is a difficult spot because obviously he does not want to go against the guidance of the Sixers front office and medical folks, does not want to say anything wrong. And I do think, of course, he is being truthful when he says he's very focused on coaching his team and controlling what he can. And right now, he's not the one deciding when Joel Embiid and Paul George will be playing for the Sixers next. So it's a situation where there are voices in the Sixers organization who would perhaps be better suited to answer these questions than Nick Nurse. But also, I think Nick Nurse has to understand that this is always going to be on his plate. Just that's how things tend to work in professional sports.
And the larger issue here, which has nothing to do with Nick Nurse, but he is caught directly square in the middle of, is there's a precedent here. We've been through this. We've been through this with Brett Brown years in the making, where there was a point where he had to answer so many questions about health status that he decided that he would not answer anymore because it was so frequent and so often that he was giving updates or saying this or that and maybe speaking out of turn or saying too much or what have you. So there's a precedent in place where I would say fans, media have been left in the dark or not quite as in the know about what's going on with players' injuries or when they'll return or how the team is handling them and things like that. So this precedent that's in place, is why the questions persist, is why nurses still getting, these questions pointed in his direction. So I think the precedent of the past is continuing to carry through until now. Particularly Joel Embiid has always been in the epicenter of that. So Paul George is a new player in that, but it definitely is frustrating from a fan's perspective, from a media perspective. We're not always going to get the truth or people shooting us straight, but some reasonable facsimile, some closer to the truth than we are would probably placate everyone. But here we are. Hopefully this is all kind of, getting past this now, and will be water under the bridge, so to speak. And Saturday we'll see Joel Embiid, and he'll be closer to what we know him to be out there on the floor, and it'll help lead the Sixers to a much needed victory. But frustrating, I think, would be a good word to use all the way around, from Nurse to Joel Embiid to the media, the fans. It's a little frustrating trying to navigate this stuff and be, because really the idea is like, okay, he played in the Olympics. What happened between then and now? Like this really, what the biggest, I think, question is did something happen? Did something not happen? Is there a bigger knee issue? What exactly is going on? But any final thoughts before we get out of here, Noah? Of course, we did a podcast yesterday, so kind of touched on a lot of topics. Jared McCain had a dozen points.
He did, yeah. Jared McCain had a nice night. Yeah, look, I mean, I think with Joel Embiid, like, there's clearly nuance here that is impossible to capture in a super clear way via like a team press release in all likelihood.
Right, one statement, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like, yeah, he's had, surgery on his left meniscus multiple times. He's over 30 years old, and he has a long injury history that they're, trying to approach cautiously. Surely these are all factors, swirling around and playing some sort of role in why he has not yet taken the court. But absolutely, I mean, the fact that he returned for the tail end of last year, played in the playoffs despite clearly being well below 100%, and then participated in the Olympics, all leads the matter you brought up to be the central question here that the Sixers have not yet given a satisfying answer to. But yeah, back in the day, Brett Brown was having so many instances where it was like a really sophisticated medical update with some term that none of us had ever heard before. And so that responsibility got passed along to Dave Schaller, who leads communications, public relations for the Sixers, and he was often giving us, the full detail of those updates. And Brett Brown did not have that on his plate anymore. But yeah, Nick Nurse is the one who sort of has to speak to these matters for the time being, and no one's thrilled with what he's had to say. But if and when Joel Embiid and Paul George are playing again, obviously this all falls to the background, and there's a lot less spotlight on this particular issue. So, yeah, I think, though, it is just unavoidably central for the Sixers, because the reason they've played pretty poor basketball in 3 of their 4 games is who they have available to play. I mean, that's the bottom line here. And like, we'll do our best to dissect the games themselves and find what's interesting and pinpoint what's going wrong, what's going right. But really, the availability of the star players is what very obviously matters most here. And like it or not, that's going to be the focus of much of reporters' questioning until those stars are actually back out on the court. So yeah, while they're shorthanded, the guys available have to do better. And yeah, they really would not love to slide to 1-4 with a loss to Memphis. I think that's a game where it would be concerning if you don't see a heightened level of urgency from the Sixers, if you don't see greater attention to detail, better execution, better transition defense. Nick Nurse, I think, is really going to stress all those things in the next couple of days and demand that out of his team when they next take the floor.
They don't beat Memphis. You don't get a home win until November, the first week of November. Like what? I guess Saturday's November 2nd. So anyway, it's frustrating to think about and tough for fans. Hang in there, though. Hopefully things will come to a head, and Joel will be in his most healthy state that we've seen him, because they're supposedly monitoring, keeping an eye on, tabs on that knee. It will be a constant thing throughout the seasons, and that's why he won't be playing in back-to-backs as much. And it will be something that they keep an eye on, and hopefully that gets him to the postseason in his healthiest state and most dominant state as well. So, hey, sublimation. You got to sublimate a little bit, Sixers fans. You kind of tough it out now for the regular season. You get to the postseason, all of a sudden you've got a team that can win a title because their best players are healthy. So I think it will be worth it, hopefully. And I'm just trying to talk you into it. I'm trying to talk me into it. So let's just take it day by day, step by step. Check out Noah Levick's work on NBC Sports Philadelphia.com. Happy Halloween to everyone out there. This has been the Sixers Talk podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University. Wilmy works for Noah. I'm Danny, and Ben Barry, our producer extraordinaire. Thanks for listening and watching. We'll see you next time.